for a book discussion. And I'm Nixon, and I'm currently the president of Naga Scholars Association. And for those of you who are new to this platform, Naga Scholars Association is a platform for the Naga scholars to interact and promote academic excellence, and also to promote intellectual and academic activities such as seminars, workshops, and conferences. And we do emphasize on interacting and networking with other academics, intellectual forums, and institutions. And today, we are excited to have organized this particular book discussion. And it's a book by Dr. G. Kanato Chophy on Christianity and Politics in Tribal India, Baptist Missionaries and Naga Nationalism. In fact, Dr. Kanato Chophy is not new to the NSA platform. I can recall his other book in 2019, which called Constructing the Divine, Religion and Worldview of a Naga Tribe in Northeast India, which NSA had also hosted a program on. So we are glad to have him. And Dr. Kanato Chophy holds a PhD in social anthropology from the Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. He is a postdoctoral fellow in the Center of Excellence, Center of Northeast India Studies, Utkal University, Bhubaneswar in Odisha. And his research interests center on the ethnohistory of Northeast India, comparative religion, tribes and indigenous people, traditional knowledge system, and anthropology of public policy. So Dr. Chophy, we are glad to have you here, and we look forward to an engaging unpacking of this book and question and a larger discussion on the book itself.
Thank you.
And today's session is will be chaired by Dr. Eyingbeni Humtsoe-Nienu, who is of course no stranger to Naga Scholar Association because he has been an active participant in many of ventures that NSA has organized. Dr. Eyingbeni is currently the principal of Baptist Theological College in Putsero, Nagaland. And she did her Doctor of Theology with Southeast Asia Graduate School of Theology in Singapore. Her specialization is in the area of Christian theology. And in fact, she had previously taught at the Academy of Integrated Christian Studies, ISOL, Eastern Theological College, Jorhat, Clark Theological College, Mokokchung. And she has also written numerous books, which includes God of the Tribes, Naga's Essay for Change, Concise Lotha English Dictionary of Christian Faith, Prayers and Litanies for All Occasions. Thank you, Dr. Eyingbeni, for agreeing to be the chair for this particular discussion. And we have Dr. John Thomas as a discussion today for the session. And Dr. John Thomas is not new to the Naga community. For those of us who have known him since the JNU days, he was actively involved in the activities of the Naga community in the JNU, and he had done a very fantastic research on a particular Naga topic. And there's no better person, in a sense, to be a discussion today than him. John Thomas currently is an assistant professor of history at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, Assam. Much of his research and writings have been on the history of Christian missions, religious convergence, and the role of religion in the formation of cultural and political identities, especially in South and Northeast India. And he is the author of the book, Evangelizing the Nation, Religion and the Formation of Naga Political Identities, which was published in 2016. And that was his PhD research. And in that book, he examined the role of the missionaries, church, and the colonial and post-colonial states in promoting and sustaining a particular understanding of Christianity, and the impact that had on the formation and character of Naga nationalism in India's Northeast. Northeast. So I on behalf of Naga Scholars Association welcome all the author, the chair, and the discussion, and of course all the participants who have tuned in today. We look forward to a very engaging discussion. So with those few words, I hand over the session to the chair, Dr. Eyingbeni. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muru, the president of NSA. Thank you again. I appreciate this opportunity. And I just want to mention one thing. At the entrance of our mission compound, where BTC is located, there is an inscription. And that inscription is from the words of William Butler Yeats, which says, "There are no strangers here, only friends you haven't yet met." And every time I am with the NSA, I feel a little bit of the sort, especially in these 2 years. It has been more virtual, but I feel very close to all of the officers, the executive members, as well as all the participants. So it feels great to be in your midst even this evening. And I want to thank the NSA for giving me this privilege and this opportunity. And so I want to welcome everyone on this part of the world this evening. On the other side of this world, it's I think in the wee hours, and we're so happy that some could join us. And I think very particularly I can see Dr. Paul Pimomo. When I mentioned to him about this or reminded him, he said that it's going to be unearthly hours, but the topic is so important that I'm not going to miss it. And so he's here with us this evening. And so we welcome everybody from India and also nearby as well as overseas to a session of discussion. I think it is a great privilege that the author himself is with us this evening. And as you are all aware, and you have been reminded again, we will be listening from the author himself on Christianity and the politics in tribal India. And we will first let the author speak about his book. I think he will present his book, given that perhaps many of us may not have read the book yet. And so he will tell us a little bit about it, maybe a chapter to chapter, so that we can have a very clear understanding of the content of the book. And then that will be followed perhaps by a response, a discussion by Dr. John Thomas. And then we will have a time of discussion from the participants. You can please raise your questions. You can also type in your question in the chat section. We will take note, and when it is time, we will present your queries, and we will also give you time, if necessary, to explain your question. And I believe that the book, for those who have read it, it's one of the most engaging books on Naga history, I would say. It is not only a descriptive account of what has been, but it also brings a very exciting scenario of what the past means for us today and its effect on the 21st century Christians in general and the Baptists in particular. It is a little bit like a monograph, a little bit like a memoir, a little bit like a biography, and also a little bit like an autobiography, because we get a glimpse of who Kanato is as a thinker, as a scholar, and perhaps we can deduce safely, I think, that he is a very keen observer. And I think it is a privilege for us to have this time to let the author himself talk more about the book. And so, Dr. Kanato, may I give the time to you?
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Eyingbeni, for that very kind introduction. I think you have done a good job basically talking about the book, the interweaving of perspectives. So perhaps we will spend some time talking about the book in detail. Yeah, but before I just jump into what the book is all about, I am very, very much privileged and thankful to NSA. One of the reasons is that I'm traveling frequently to different parts, and then that's also maybe one of the reasons that I'm unable to actually associate myself with NSA. But I know the kind of work, the engagement, and the intellectual inputs that NSA has been giving to the Naga society at large. These are things which is quite commendable, and our belief is that that NSA will do much better even in coming days. So thank you, Dr. Nixon. Thank you, Dr. Elvina, and the team members for graciously inviting me to actually discuss this book on a very important platform. I think some of you, I'm a bookseller also. So writers, we basically have to also sell books, and so that our upcoming books doesn't, become a disappointment to the publisher. So I think that actually, whenever we write books, I think that is quite very important, how much you are being able to publicize or sell or reach out to the larger audience. And I'm quite happy that I've been given a platform like this, which I think this is like something very dear to me, quite privileged to be here also, with NSA. But some of you, I see some friends who have been with me over this couple of weeks, where I have talked about the book in some other platform as such. I think you are so bored of seeing me, but after this, I can maybe hibernate for another 2 or 3 years to, just finish off my next book. So anyway, hope we will have more debates and discussions even in days to come. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. I would like to also thank these very bright academics, upcoming academics, as well as people who are quite established in the field. Dr. John Thomas, I'm told Professor Paul Pimomo is also with us. I'm quite privileged, very happy to have him with us, and others here whom I can't see, but who have joined this very important deliberation. Thank you. I extend my gratitude to everyone for being here. So this book, actually, it started with a title called Children of the Great Awakening. So that is a book that I first floated when I started talking with the publishers. Basically, the book is all about how one evangelical Protestant movement that started somewhere in the United States have actually impacted, very far-flung, remote place like us, and how it has changed our culture, our politics, our identity, and in fact, even as Nagas we understand ourselves. So that is how the book actually began. But we also have to see in terms of how book has to reach to the larger audience and even to the readers as such. So we decided to, we ended up with a rather very academic title called Christianity and Politics in Tribal India. So that is how we ended up. So a lot has been written about in this book. I have basically covered history starting from 1839, the first Baptist encounter with the Nagas by Miles Bronson to up to the 21st century. So very, very long stretch of history about Nagas, and about us, our destiny, and about our past, about our mistakes as such. So it is a very long history, and I'm sure like there are many things which, as Naga scholars, many of us know. But as an author, from the research and also from the critics, the reception that I'm getting from others is they think that this has been the most, perhaps the important thing about this book, or rather the defining thing about this book, is the narrative. And basically that is how I wanted this book to be. I've realized that narratives are very, very powerful in how, as a writer, how we present ourselves, how we present our material to others, to readers. As much as possible, I've tried to make the narratives quite simple. To my best of my ability, I've tried to research the subject very deeply. I think traveling to different parts of India, going to check archives in the US and other parts as such. But what I try to do is basically trying attempted, to present very dense history in terms of a narrative which is like easily digestible and which any people from any subject can just pick it up and read. So I think that is something that I've attempted, and perhaps that is the highlight of the book. I think the narrative has been quite different. So you will see so many things which others have talked about that I have talked same, but I think perhaps when you read the book, you will realize that I think there is a better way of putting things into perspective, or maybe our language can be, quite appealing and then quite readable to the readers as such. So this is something that I've done. Also because I'm trained as an anthropologist, but as a writer, I think I'm more inclined towards what I call as creative nonfiction. So that is something that I'm attempting to do. Like I write, of course, papers, something which is close to anthropology, with my limited ability trying to write theoretical papers. But this book is basically, it's a form of creative nonfiction. I should say richly researched. I've spent 3 years researching this book. So, cross-checked facts and things like that. But I think this book is about creative nonfiction, which I would very much encourage upcoming Naga scholars also to experiment. I've been just thinking that it's time, I think as Naga scholars, being part of NSA, being part of this family, I think we've spent so much time just writing about ourselves. We write subjects which is read only by, or we become experts only, within our own communities. Or the best we do is we just larger as Nagas or Bugis. But I think the time has come and we have enough good scholars, very brilliant Naga scholars who should start writing authoritatively about Indian history, about Indian society as such. So what I have attempted to do is I also try to, while trying to understand the Nagas, while trying to understand our history and our politics as such, I've also given a kind of a very broad commentary about post-independence India, about Indian democracy, about post the whole democratic process that has taken place for the past 70 years. So these are things that I have attempted in this book. The other thing, so much thing that I have written about, but the other thing that I have tried to attempt in this book is trying to have, the bigger, trying to understand the bigger picture. So the interconnection. Now, as a writer, I realized that's very important. So how do we connect our history or maybe events or something which might be happening in a small corner of Kohima or Tuengsang or Ukhrul or Senapati? These are places, but how this is actually connected to the larger historical events or larger global happenings at the level of in India as well as the other parts of the world. So, for instance, I've tried to understand the whole Naga Baptist through trying to explain what 19th century evangelicalism is all about. I'm sure we have some scholars of religion, they will understand what this 19th century evangelicalism is. Or I also try to understand how 20th century Pentecostal movement has really changed the contours of the Naga Baptist faith. Not just faith itself, but how we understand ourselves. Even for that matter, even Naga national movement has been very much, when we talk about faith of people like Isaac Chishisu and all, I think this is very much inspired by the whole charismatic movement. So these are things that I've tried to explain in the book, trying to understand the bigger global connections, trying to make the larger historical connections. So I think that is one of the strengths of the book, which even my editor told me as I was writing this book, and even in the process of finishing this book. And the other aspect about the strength of this book, I should say, or maybe if some, we have some people who are from a very objective, kind of an archive, or from a very quantitative kind of training background, they might think this book is a little bit problematic, but like Dr. Eying said, I have tried to actually put myself, So as an insider, I've also tried to explain how, as a member of the Naga family, as practicing Baptist, how this faith has affected me, or how I've tried to understand the whole process through myself as such. So what we call in anthropology as reflexivity, I think that is one process that I've tried to actually make use of while trying to understand this book. So as an insider, I think that gives us a little bit distinct vantage point. Because there we have very rich archives and writings about Nagas and about Naga Christianity as such, but I think our experiences, how this faith, or how the Baptist faith, or how the whole process of Christian mission has shaped individuals and families and tribes. I think this is something that I have tried to attempt in the book, about giving much more introspection on the insider's perspective. The other thing that perhaps the last thing that I might want to say a little bit about the book is that there is a particular vantage point. So I'm sure readers would be intelligent enough to understand that there's a vantage point that I have taken. So the vantage point is basically I've tried to understand Naga history and our political movements, so much so that even trying to understand the lives of important personalities through the lens of the Baptist faith. So I think this is something that I've attempted. So I'm sure readers will find it a little bit strange when I talk about people like Jadona or Piso or Sacre or Rani Gaidinliu or Skatos, Kaito. These are like the General Mo and stuff. These are people who are the so-called leading actors of the whole Naga political drama. So maybe not others have also attempted, but the strength of this book is actually I've given a very distinct Baptist vantage point in trying to understand even the lives of this personality and understanding our history as such. So for that matter, everybody talks about how formation of the Naga Club gave rise to some sense of flickering sense of ethno-nationalism, but I've gone a little bit beyond that, and I've said that that Naga Club is not necessarily the first modern Naga organization, but I've talked about how Baptist organization, as late as 1890s, there were already modern Baptist associations which tribal communities. I think this has been kind of a basis, or rather, this has been the wellspring of Naga modern association as such. So these are things that I have tried to really understand the whole Naga politics and even the political movement from a distinct Baptist vantage point. So I would be very happy if you can just go through the book and then maybe make sense of what I'm trying to talk about, the distinct Baptist mission vantage point that I've given to this book. And last thing that I have tried with my years of training in anthropology, or at what I'm an ethnographer. I've been trained in this whole method called ethnography. So what I've tried to do to the book is I've been very careful with the prose. I think prose is very important, especially if you want to reach the book to a larger audience. So I've been very particular with the prose, and if I may take the credit, friends and well-wishers have been saying that the prose is quite appealing and quite engaging as such. So I'm quite very happy about the prose as such. And I'm sure there are lots of loopholes and unanswered questions. I've been asked questions why I didn't write about this particular event, or why I didn't write about that particular person. But like I said, writing about more than 150 years of Naga history, this is such a Herculean task. So I could not put everything into the book, but to my best knowledge, I've tried to cover all the important events and people that matters in the whole history of Naga Christianity. So that is much about the strength and a little bit about the writing process. So if I have to talk about the book, it's a very thick book. Actually, this book came to about 750 pages, you know. So, but publishers say that per chapter, I think that is the standard, that it can't be more than 14,000. So for instance, there's a particular chapter called The Empire and the Pearly Gates, where I left a huge chunk analyzing the whole Baptist mission movement in Burma, you know, at the backdrop of the rise and fall of the Ava kingdom. So these are things that I left out. Also, a large chunk of chapters, I mean, like sections were left out because the book also turned out to be quite thick, and also the publisher and the editor felt like these things can be left, you know, for an upcoming book as such. So those are things that I had left out. Yeah, but if you ask me how do I divide the book, I think this book can be divided into rather 3 sections. So the first section is what I've tried to do in the first section is 3 broad themes. So the first is about the whole Naga Baptists, locating the Naga Baptists within the larger history, the larger framework of Buddhism, and also about Christian movements, and also the rise and fall of empires and the rise of nation states. So that is a very broad chapter, a very broad, trying to locate Nagas within the larger broad framework. That is something that I attempted. So within that section, there are chapters like the empires and the pearly gates. There's another new conceptual model that I have floated. It's called the Baptist Highland. So I'm sure which anthropologists and sociologists might find it useful. So I've used this model called the Baptist Highland to better understand the Kachins and the Chins and other Christian groups, other ethnic communities who live in the Indo-Myanmar border. The second section is basically about the different tribes of Nagaland, also touching more on tribes from a little bit, not more. I've touched on the tribes of Arunachal as well as Assam, and then even a bit on Manipur. Yeah. So this is basically about describe individual tribes, how the whole Baptist movement took place, and how education, modernity, and politics has rather affect the whole tribe as such. So that is something that I attempted in the second section. The third section is most, or it's like quasi biography kind of thing, where I have talked about the lives of important people, people who actually matter in Naga history. So there are chapters like Baptist intellectuals. There's a chapter called Baptist intellectuals. So a chapter called Pragmatists and Idealists. And there's also a chapter called Guns, the Bible and the Little Red Book. So trying to make connection with the larger history of how China, India, and Nagas live interacted as such. Yeah. So these are chapters, very broadly, these are chapters that I've subdivided. In conclusion, I've not commented much, but I've also commented about Nagas in the 21st century. I think a little bit about our Christian faith and how we are, who we are, or where we are headed in the 21st century. So these are a little bit broad division that I've given to, I've made while writing this book. Yeah. So maybe I can end here. Lots to discuss, but I think I'll just stop here. And yeah, back to you, Dr. Eying. Yeah, thank you for giving me this time.
Thank you, Dr. Kanato. I think it gives us a good view into the contents of the book. And now we will give time to Dr. John for a response to the book. Dr. John, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Eyingbeni, and also thank you to Nixon. We are good old friends from JNU, and thank you and to all the executive committee members of the NSA for inviting me to be part of this very interesting discussion. And at the outset, I really want to congratulate Kanato on this book. Which when he says it's 750, he wrote 750 pages. It really shows that how much of information and how much of processing that he has been doing with this theme. And I really want to congratulate you for writing this book. Unfortunately, this discussion is being held quite early, that I still have not received my copy, although I've ordered it. So I have not read the book, and that is one of the disadvantages from which I will be speaking today. And I feel that sometimes I may not be doing justice to what Kanato has done, and in my response, because I've not read it, and I ask your forgiveness for that. But based on, I think Kanato was really. He was, I am quite happy that he was able to share at least the introduction and the conclusion of the book to me, which I had a very interesting read. So a lot of my response will be based on what I read from the introduction and conclusion, and also what Kanato had written in the Permanent Black website, which was a very interesting piece of essay on, a small essay on the significance of the book. So I just wanted to kind of say that I have not read the book, and so please forgive me if I'm saying things which may not be doing justice to you or to the book. One of the points that I've really found interesting in this is that you depart from a certain kind of objectification of tradition. It's often Naga society is seen purely in terms of this binary of modernity and tradition. While many of the European anthropologists tend to continue to kind of at times follow the colonial anthropological kind of gaze of looking at Nagas as these pristine, half-naked tribes, as photographic subjects, those who are to be museumized and put in museums in various European museums, so that image of the Naga continues to live on. And the moment, even in the Indian national, in the national space, that's the kind of image that one begins to kind of get constructed. And Kanato, in fact, departs from that and shows that Nagas are also engaging with the various historical changes that are happening. It's not a isolated, small, isolated little group of people. It's people are moving out, people are engaging with new ideas, however limited it is. And I feel that the last 100 years have been extremely dramatic, and that's also something that Kanato really brings out, that it's very difficult to find a situation where within 100 years so much changes in a society, and in the midst of that changes, Nagas have been able to kind of continue to figure, negotiate despite all the limitations. And I think he has been able to bring in some of those nuances. And as he himself says, as an insider, the perspective that comes into it is, of course, is much more nuanced than for someone like me, who's always been an outsider in terms of as a researcher writing on the Nagas, because I've had to just rely on the material that's available to me. It's been a very Herculean task to really understand some of the nuances for me, as an outsider. And so I'm really happy that Kanato has been able to bring those nuances, and also the heterogeneity of what Nagas are. We often think of Nagas, and when I say we, I'm talking as a non-Naga. Nagas are seen, as any nationality tends to be seen, as one homogeneous block. And Kanato really kind of breaks it down and tries to show the various heterogeneity, the diversity within. And also within the Naga Baptists, the Baptist doctrine is not something that is a monolith. It's not something uniform. It's not something where there is a set doctrine and everybody is following it. And he tries to talk about the Baptist tradition itself as one that encourages autonomous, independent kind of units, that in fact also kind of gives space for different kind of articulation of what it means to be Baptist. And I think that I found to be interesting, and that's something that I myself have not really been looked too deeply into, and I found that to be something that he's trying to look at in his book. And as someone from as a non-Naga, as someone from India, I'm saying this because we often talk of Indo-Naga, and as someone from mainland India, I think some of the points he has made, especially in his essay, and I'm glad that he made those points in an essay in a mainline publishing company's website, because it's about what does it mean for Nagas to be part of India, and he talks about he coins the term of constitutional Indians, and that the Indo-Naga relationship hangs on a constitutional promise. It hangs purely on a constitutional promise, and that sense of otherwise being part of India is something that seems to be not there. And he also makes this very important point that as an Indian, I often constantly kind of say this when I'm talking about nationalism, is that this idea of India cannot sustain itself without taking into consideration the differences that we are, and he's able to kind of address this point, and talk about that. You have to understand the Nagas. You have to empathize with the Nagas. You have to understand why they are asking the kind of questions that they are asking. And it is only through that engagement, and it is only through engagement with the multiple nationalities. And he talks about different nationalities having different smells and different tastes, and I think it's a very important thing. And India has not really, and it's a big Herculean task to be able to really live with that difference. It's easy to do. It's easy to live with people who talks, who are very much like us. But it's very much more different and challenging to live with people who are diverse. And to live with difference is one of the biggest challenges of India, and it's also one of the most beautiful aspects of India, which sadly, India itself is forgetting sight of. And it's losing sight of, and it's not. If India has to survive, and this I very much stand with Kanato in what he says, that India has to survive, it has to acknowledge and recognize these differences, and one has to understand that there can also be one of the largest Baptist populations even within this so-called what one calls the Hindu Rashtra or Akhand Bharat, people, the kind of way in which India is being pushed into being defined as, that, there is space for everyone here, and you cannot deny that kind of space. When you talk of a Akhand Bharat and Hindu Rashtra, you are actually slowly excluding, and homogenization projects always it's inherent to those homogenization projects to always exclude. And on that, coming from that point, I also would like to kind of maybe problematize one aspect that Kanato keeps talking about, is the category called Naga Baptist, and which, I sometimes wonder if, and this is again, something that I have not read the book, so it's something, it's a hunch that I'm having in terms of, even when we are talking of the diversity among the Naga Baptists, do we tend to sometimes universalize Naga Baptists for defining who Nagas are? And you also said that you are looking at it from a Naga Baptist vantage point. But then from that vantage point, is there a universalizing impulse wherein Nagas tend to be seen through a Baptist frame? And whether that would be something that would sustain itself, given how diverse Nagas themselves are in terms of even religion, because as I studied a great deal, and I found it very fascinating to look into the history of the Zeliang Rong movement, which is not part of the Naga mainstream history also, because it's seen as the heretical kind of movement, but it's very interesting because that movement has really, it's been misrepresented and misunderstood at various levels, and that is also part of what Nagas are, and I think, and that's what makes it interesting, that Nagas become interesting in that sense, the differences that are there, the diversity that is there. So, I often, I feel that this sense of universalizing, how far will it be, will it create any kind of exclusions? How far will it trigger certain kind of exclusions? And these are some concerns that I have. Maybe, that's not something that is there in your, the way you are doing it. But, when you say Naga Baptist itself, and this tendency, because it is the majoritarian, it is the main discursive frame within which you look at things, you tend to sometimes, Naga Baptist stands for Naga. And I feel that may lead to certain kind of exclusions. Having said this much, I do not, because I have not read the book, I don't want to kind of comment any further on these things. And I think this is a very fine, and I very much agree with Kanato that a lot more Naga scholars need to write. One of the issues that I struggle with a lot of my own students who come largely from oral societies like Nagas, is that, the long history of orality has made you have excellent ideas, but the whole idea of writing always is very daunting, and I see that with most of my students, and I would really urge Naga scholars to write, and it's a very important, I think, break that Kanato has done in terms of getting and mainline Indian publisher to actually listen to what the Naga story is, and many of the, you don't see in the mainline publishing industry, any kind of, on Northeast there are works, but then, it's always on, conflict. There are certain set themes. Only if you fit into these themes will you get published. And I'm happy that Kanato has been able to kind of push through that wall, get his book published by Permanent Black, and also make this point that, Naga Baptists are also part of this mosaic of people who we call India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. John Thomas. It was a privilege getting to read your book on evangelizing the nations. And I thank Dr. Elvina for forwarding the soft copy. And I think the depth of that book is really appreciated. And as somebody has posted there, Bethel, it is highly recommended and very well read. And as I read that book, I was thinking that actually you are more patriotic than a lot of the Nagas, especially looking at it from the post-colonial perspective. I think the critique that you gave, those are really insightful, especially for researchers today. And I'm sure that Dr. Kanato has a lot to comment on what Dr. Thomas has said about the book. But I think of one particular interest, and alluding to your book, would be the term Baptist faith. I think that's what Dr. John is also referring to, the Naga Baptist faith. And it all boils down to the method that perhaps you have adopted in your book. Universalization vis-a-vis, or, on the other hand, particularizing. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think Dr. Thomas has raised a very significant rather a methodological paradox, which I think every writer struggles with when we, give big terms or concepts. Yeah. So I think that is a very important concept. But what I have tried to, if you just go through the book, I have said that the whole Baptist faith is quite diverse, and I've talked about how the Nagas in Arunachal, I mean, like they are developing according to their own historical as well as their own political realities. So I mean, for my Naga Baptist friends in Arunachal, they are in the midst of this very effervescent traditional reformed religion, which I think Nagas in Nagaland don't face. Also, they are also being pushed by this very strident, rather very confident Hindu mission. So I think that has very much shaped the whole contours or the whole the whole dynamics of Baptist faith among the tribes of Arunachal Pradesh, like whether it's Tangsa, or whether it's Wancho or Nokte, whom we consider to be as the Naga groups. Also, if you go to, Manipur is another fascinating reality, because for the Nagas of Manipur, they have to deal with the Kukis, very gun-wielding, rather very powerful chiefs who have a very interesting chieftainship system. Also, they also have to deal with the larger Meitei groups, with a very rather very exciting, rather very interesting Vaishnavism that is being practiced in the Imphal Valley. So if you come to Assam, again, that is another different story, especially if you go to districts like Dima Hasao, or if you go to, I've been to these places, if you see the Reimas of, this in Karbi Anglong, they live among the dominant Assamese population. So even there, the Baptist faith that is being projected, or the Baptist faith that is being developed there, is quite different. The realities, the faith is, maybe we have certain commonalities when it comes to Baptist faith, about sola scriptura, that is something that I mentioned, or salvation by faith alone, or literal interpretation of the scriptures. These are things, which is quite common across all the Naga groups. But there are, I think, Naga Baptists across the state boundaries are, developing quite differently. And I'm sure in another 10, 15 years, we can't expect what kind of, Baptist religion is going to emerge in different places. And also, when I talked about this whole Naga Baptist faith, I've mentioned in the book that there's a definable Naga Baptist culture. So there are certain things that we can say, oh, this is shared in common by all the Naga Baptists, by the Naga tribes, different tribes. But very frankly enough, if you see my upbringing is more like the Southern Baptist faith, especially when it comes to the position of women ordainship, or our literal reading of the scriptures, or eschatology. The kind of church that I grew up was Southern Baptist, the teachings. But if you come to Dimapur and see some churches that are uber, they call themselves Baptist, but they are uber Pentecostals, very charismatic, very interesting. And so also, if you go among the Angamis, Angamis are very interesting people. They have people from Baptist, they either shift to Catholicism and to Christian Revival Church, and if they are not happy, again, this Christian Revival Church left, and then they form something called Baptist Revival, And then this Baptist Revival is quite very different from what we see in the traditional Baptist churches in KD, in Kohima, I think people know, or even Yunnan Baptist Church. So I think what we see is even within the Baptist faith, there's a diversification that is happening. And this maybe this also has to do with our internal politics. The church politics is very much prevalent, but something that I've mentioned in the book is how Christian movements of different shapes and sizes from both Europe as well as US have actually affected the Baptist faith in Nagaland. I talked about, if you read the chapter on there's a chapter called Some Converts Are More Equal Than Others. So there I've talked about the Chang and the Yungchunger Nagas. So there I've talked about, how true love waits, this whole movement actually has impacted the Naga Baptists. I mean, something, the purity movement, which started in 1990s with the Southern Baptist Convention, is actually become part and parcel of the youth culture movement among the Baptists. So these are things, I think, the diversification that I've talked about. So Dr. John Thomas says, rather, that is a very, very important question which he has raised. I'm sure I was unable to really address the entire theme in my book, but yes, definitely I've talked about the diversity as well as the commonalities that is shaped by, or that is something which I call as the Baptist faith. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Ying. Yeah, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanato. And Dr. John, would you like to pursue that? Or is that okay?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, then. Thank you. We appreciate your participation. Yes, there is a question from Dr. Vio Pau, and I think this is with reference to Dr. Kanato's statement in one of the chapters. And I think he has quoted, it's on a chat box, but maybe I will read it. A statement in the introduction of the book quite intrigued me, and let me quote. Ironically, most of what the students learn in this Bible colleges, I think is very specifically referring to Clark, Theological, and Whittier, which you visited, colleges named after the first American missionaries to the tribes. This Bible colleges does not tell you with social reality, the Baptist churches having to grapple with new social realities. Would you like to elaborate on that, Dr. Kanato?
Yeah, I think Dr. Veo has rather that is a very controversial statement which I made also. Thank you for pointing that out. See, something that I have visited. I visited all the Baptist colleges. Like went to ETC, even visited Serampore and Bishop's College. And definitely I went to all the Baptist seminaries in Nagaland. Something that I found is that they are certain what many of the students are learning. I mean, like interestingly, something called subaltern theology or feminist theology or Dalit theology. I think Dr. Eying is a tribal theology expert, right? I'm sure you have written books on tribal theology, but I mean, don't mind. Okay, as an anthropologist, something that I observe is that there seems to be a kind of a gap, rather a chasm between what the students learn in the theological seminaries and the church, because when you might have your PhD from Southern Baptist Seminary or Dallas Baptist Seminary, but when you come back to Nagaland, you have to actually go according to the whims and fancies of the elderly people, if I may say that, in the villages. I saw that with my own eyes. Or the pastors have to go according to what the deacon says. These are things which is quite contradictory to the Baptist practice, but I think that is the Naga reality. So in fact, I've seen that some very bright theologians decides not to go to ministry and rather teach because they think that their teaching is not going to actually be of any use in the Baptist church. Dr. Ying, I'm sure you're free to comment on that, but that is an observation I made, as an outsider, having not attended Baptist seminary. So exactly, Dr. I think that is the point that I was mentioning, that many topics or books and chapters that, topics that they learn in theological seminaries actually do not work when they come back to their own hometowns and churches back home. So thank you. Any comment on that, Dr. Ying?
Yeah, I have this against you that you did not visit our college. Well, I think your observation is, I think to a great extent, very true. The disconnect between the curriculum and the practice. I think you have also rightly pointed out that there are obstacles to putting the learning into practice. And that's basically because of the traditions of the church. And I think I also agree with what you have said about Baptist faith, which is a very particular kind of faith that we have. Maybe a little bit, maybe in theory more North American, but in practice more Southern Baptist. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is very much evident. But I think if I may also add, the kind of courses that we also teach in schools, theological schools, it's not all in vain. And we hear that, you know, it takes a lot of courage, and also it takes a lot of persuasion as well, and maybe a lot of patience. But in some forms, it is taking shape, you know, in the actual life of the church. And I get to hear it from my own classmates, my colleagues who now are like the senior pastors of the church and have a voice. No, like as soon as they graduate, maybe they don't have much of a voice, but then later on, when they come to leadership positions, they have some like place of influence. And I think maybe not immediately, but in the long run, what they learn in seminaries are, you know, bearing fruit. And I think that's a good thing. And we just have to be a little more patient and not give up. And you talked about subaltern theologies and also many other contextual theologies which are being taught because it's part of the curriculum under the Senate of Singapore. And I think in a lot of ways, even women's participation in the church, it would not have come if not for this effort by the seminaries. So I think we see some positive changes or progress in our churches. So we are hopeful. Yeah, but
okay, thank you.
Still a long way to go. Yes. And thank you, Dr. Paul, for the question. And there is one question from NSA. I don't know whether you would like to address that. Maybe even Dr. John, if you would like to come in. Can you share some effective methods, or rather must do while researching oral source of culture? It's like a research methodology. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, Dr. John, would you like to?
I think it's this would need a seminar and an entire session on its own.
I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah, it's so I can only say that, you know, it's a very important methodology to adopt in the context of the Nagas, and something that in my own researches I was not able to do because of various difficult disadvantages of being an outsider. Language itself becoming a very important stumbling block, but I think there is so much of possibilities, and it's a method that, you know, oral history projects are become so popular, especially in the Western nations, in Europe and in the America. Primarily, you know, and you know, it's not just recording. You know, it's also about using the recording to kind of create a very strong oral archive and oral narrative, and for communities that have been traditionally or for a long time, you know, has been, you know, I remember that tale of the dog, you know, eating up the Naga script when the script was handed down, you know. So given that tale, you know, of script having been lost, I think you know, there is so much that that doesn't mean that, you know, script is not, you know, modernity has privileged script, you know, modernity has privileged writing, but that doesn't mean there is nothing that is left in the oral to be explored. So I see it as a space of possibilities.
Yeah, so very quickly, see, when it comes to Naga oral tradition, I think with humility, I have to say that for so long we have been letting Europeans and American scholars define oral tradition for us. So they think that our oral traditions are not reliable, you know. And this is one thing that I haven't been able to really research extensively, theoretically on the whole Naga oral tradition. But I think we need to develop our own models and our own, you know, methodology to actually better understand ourselves. I think a lot of development has to take place in oral tradition, and that's a very significant question. Just quickly regarding to what Dr. Thomas talks about, dog eating the Naga script, which is like shared in common by all Naga tribes. But my supervisor used to tell me that the person who taught me archaeology used to tell me that has two possibilities, that either that story developed at the backdrop of colonial contact, when Nagas came into contact with the superior people with writing tradition, or the professor also told me that it's possibility of some kind of memory of Nagas having contact with some civilization, because if at all this story is very long, and if it didn't develop at the backdrop of colonial contact, it might point to our Nagas contact with some kind of civilization some 1,000 years back, because he told me that writing, idea about writing has to do with some form of civilization contact. So these are things I think more researches can be done, but like I said, I think this homework has to be done by Naga scholars as such. I don't think Dr. John and I would be able to actually comment more on this. But yeah, perhaps we can, NSA can have one session, hold the session, and we can deliberate on this whole oral tradition. And I'm sure Dr. John would be happy to join, and then give his inputs. Yeah. So let me just stop it there. Yeah.
Okay. Some work for the NSA. There's a question from Professor Paul, and he is asking the question of whether you have addressed the nature and extent of interchange. Maybe we will hear it from Dr. Paul, if you could elaborate on that question.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'd be very happy if you can elaborate on that.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Paul. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, hello. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
And as you can see, I'm quite awful typing on the screen here. Yes. So I haven't read the book, and I certainly will be reading the book from cover to cover. But I was curious whether you have addressed the question of exchange or influence between the white evangelical Americans in the age of Trump, or even earlier and today, and Naga Baptists. If I don't know whether you've done it in the book. If not, maybe you could tell us something about it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Paul. I think there's a chapter I wrote on the Sangtang Nagas, on the Sangtang Nagas, and I've mentioned about Donald Trump, because this millenarian belief is very, very strong among the Naga Baptists, So much so that even in instances of blood moon, or this conflict between North Korea and the United States, or this whole issue of Palestinians and Israel, I think Nagas we interpret it as something the world is about to end, So I interviewed one very brilliant Naga theologian who actually studied in Los Angeles. I think not very far from, no, it's on the other coast, on the western coast, but they actually talked about how, Donald Trump might be the last kind of a grace that God is giving to the Christians, and that he might be some kind of a figure that God is sending to set the world right. Yeah, that kind of, so definitely you are there, but I would say this, that the North American evangelical faith, and especially even the South as well as North, definitely has a huge impact on the Naga Baptists here. So much so that because of the social media, and then now books and lectures, YouTube is there. So these things are very much easily available. So the American Baptist faith there is very much affecting the Baptist faith here. And I think with this, I would not condemn the Naga Baptist churches here, but I think we also have to be very, very careful in being wise enough to take which teachings to adopt and which teachings not to adopt from the US, because so far, that I've being part of the larger Baptist church that I've seen is that whatever comes from the West, we take it uncritically, So I think my humble submission to fellow Baptists is to be a little bit very wise when we are adopting certain teachings and theologies from the West as such. Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Paul. I think that was a very interesting question. Quickly, this book is going to be published by New York University Press, and it is being released in November. State University of New York Press, November. So it will be available there. I'll be very happy if you could promote it to the Naga Baptist, not Naga Baptist, but the Naga family there in the US as such. Yeah, I'll be very happy. You know, I'm a bookseller, so I'm telling you this, but it will be available in November by, you'll get it from State University of New York Press. So yeah, so thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question.
And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. There seems to be some problem with my system.
Yes, Dr. Eying, yeah, I think there's something wrong with your connection.
Okay, while while she's out, maybe I can fill in.
Yeah, okay. The question, yeah, I can see some questions.
Yeah, so since we are in the Q&A session, so we have a question from Sophie Lashu. How much do you think your book has been affected by the denomination your respondent or subjects professes to? Where their personal that particular question. Yeah, I think you have, it's there.
Yeah, so I'm using my phone, so I'll be very grateful if you can read out the question. Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me read out.
Thank you for, yes, no need, I understood, yeah, but
no, there's a couple more related questions there.
Okay.
So where there are personal prejudices you had to deal with, what creative decision did you make when you were confronted with views that oppose the Baptist belief you grew up with, the Southern as you profess? Yeah, those were three related questions.
Okay. Yeah, so writing is such a difficult process that our biasness and our subjectivity and our years of cultural conditioning comes, went into our writing as such. So yeah, I think this is something that I'll leave best to the readers to decide. But yeah, it was very difficult, trying to, limit or trying to kind of mitigate my the kind of denomination that I grew up with, because they were like, what I realized is that in the way that I have described a little bit about the Baptist revival, since I've been raised in the traditional Baptist family, Baptist background, and I haven't heard much about the Baptist revival. So what I did is I spent much more time just actually trying to listen to the other side, And what I have done throughout the book is, as much as possible, letting the subject speak, or letting people speak. So maybe there are certain issues, or there are certain themes or topics which people have mentioned, which might not be historically accurate also, but actually this talks a lot about the whole dynamics, the whole social reality. So I've definitely mentioned that, yeah. But like I said, it was a very difficult process for me. And when you see, there are certain instances where I think even my traditional Baptist upbringing has actually crept into the writing. Yeah. So, but it required a lot of reflexivity, a lot of cross-checking, a lot of looking into the archives, and also listening to both the sides to come to some kind of a balanced view to actually talk about the Naga Baptist. Yeah. So yeah, but that is a rather very difficult methodological issue that I faced, and thank you for raising that. Yeah.
Thank you, Kanato. So we are going to continue with this Q&A because lots of questions are pouring in. So I hope we are staying put till we address all the questions that come in. Oh, sorry, the Dr. Eyingbeni is back. Okay, please take it over.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, my deepest apologies. There was some connection issue.
Yeah.
I don't know, Dr. Ngoru, maybe you have addressed the.
So I think you can start. You can there's this question from Vikavi Asumi. I think you can start from there. You can.
Oh, I see. Okay, so Mr. Shimri Wong's question has been addressed.
No, it hasn't been. Sophie's question has been addressed. So
okay,
you can just start from the Vikavi Asumi's and then go. Ahead.
All right, then maybe I will give the time to Vikavi, if you would like to please come in and then with your questions, please. I think I've lost most of the questions now.
So can I read it? I mean,
Please, please.
just type it.
Yes,
Okay, with your
because
permission.
it got disconnected, so the questions are lost.
All right. Okay. Okay. Let me start with Dr. Simrung's question. The question is, I'm particularly curious about the interrelationship between Baptist ideology and politics in Naga context. So I think the question essentially is about how to elaborate this interrelationship between Baptist ideology and politics in Naga context. Yep.
Yeah, so this question has been like extensively addressed in two chapters. One is called the Baptist Intellectuals, and the other on the chapter called Pragmatists and Idealists. So I'm sure like our friend will be able to understand better when he reads, because there's a whole section that I deal with. But when we talk about Baptist ideology and politics as such, this is a very nuanced concept, and it has to be handled very carefully, because many at times, especially in the mainland, people think that we became anti-nationals because of the Baptist faith, that it was because of the Baptist missionaries who instigated the whole Naga movement, or even people who go to the extent of saying that it is the Baptist mission who sowed the seed of Naga nationalism, or who actually made Nagas politically very radical. I think these are rather very loaded, and to my knowledge and as my research leader, these are rather very wrong misconception of the whole Naga Baptist ideology, and then the whole Naga politics. But yes, we have to acknowledge that most of the leading Naga political leaders, they were from the Baptist background, and this basically not necessarily because they were Baptists. Of course, Baptist faith has played a very much instrumental role in talking about liberty, in talking about the accountability of individuals, also talking about, these are things which the Baptist faith talks a lot about. But we also have to understand that even among these people who were raised in very devout Baptist background, they took different paths. So we have people like Pizzo, or we have people like Isaac Chishisu, or we have people like Muiva, or we have people like Sakre, raised from kind of a Baptist background, raised in Baptist churches, taking up a very different approach. Well, in the meantime, I've mentioned in the book, we have people like Long Riao, we have people like Dr. Tiao, we have people like Essi Jamir, So people and we have diverse, when we talk about Naga politics, I think it's time that we start learning that Naga politics is not necessarily moderates and extremists. I think this is a very wrong way of trying to understand Naga politics, but I think Naga politics is a spectrum, and every one of us fall in some level in that spectrum. Yeah. So yes, definitely, Baptist ideology has very much shaped the Naga politics, but this has to be understood in a much more nuanced manner. Also, the second thing that we have to understand is that as far as the Baptist background and the political ideology of Nagas are concerned, we cannot be extremists or moderates. I think it has to be seen more in terms of a spectrum. Yeah. So thank you. I think that was a very interesting question. I'll have to dwell more on that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again. I think I will invite Dr. Moro to please read the other questions as well.
So there's this query from Bikavi. So I think this is addressed to Kanato. So the question is, when you use this term called Naga Baptist, are you using it, invoking this particular term to represent the larger Naga idea of Christianity vis-a-vis several other denominations in the larger idea of Naga society? In what way, or I mean, the question is, in what way are you invoking this particular category of Naga Baptist?
Okay. Yeah, so when I have used the term Naga Baptist, yes, I've used it with a specific aim, with a particular objective, talking about a particular denomination a particular group of people who are practicing this faith called Naga Baptist faith. But when you see my book, I have not necessarily dwelt only on the Naga Baptist, but I have talked about the Christian Revival Church. I've also talked about other denominations. Yeah. So in doing that, what I've tried to attempt is I've talked about Naga Christianity as a whole, but within that, I've also talked about the divergences, the commonalities shared by different Naga Christian denominations. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Kanato.
Yeah.
So
okay,
I think Alemla's, I think, is just a remark. So maybe we might not have to address that. So there's a question from Tasongwi. So I think it pertains to the article that you had written recently in the Scroll, where you sort of, invented, so to say, a particular category called constitutional Indians. And so the question is, but as a Naga, what one observes is that the constitutional Indian Nagas seem to be going through a process of what can be termed as constitutional ethnicity within and among the Nagas themselves. So for instance, Nagas are most often employed as oppositional approach of defining the Nagas on the basis of the political administrative boundaries of the states across Northeast, Nagaland, Manipur, Assam, Arunachal. And so how do you negotiate through this slightly knotty issue as a Naga between the two polarity? And I think that, I mean, if I can add a few more things there, I mean, so, and constitutionally, I think Nagas in the constitutions also fits into that idea of the scheduled tribe, constitutionally speaking. And of course, apart from these various kind of disparate identity that had been, imbued by the constitution. So when one invokes that Nagas are constitutional Indians, so how do one negotiate with this different various sets of intricacies, right? I think so. That's the nutshell of what Tasongwi is trying to put across.
Yeah. So I think thank you. Maybe I need to have more conversation with you. There are some really important topics or other themes that you have raised. So this is a concept that I've been thinking to put into a book. Like I said, this is much more nuanced, and it's very surprising because this whole idea of constitutional Indians that I coined has even gone to Raj Mohan Gandhi, So people across the Indian political spectrum, both right and the liberals, are actually talking about this. On the other hand, I have also some Naga friends who are not very happy with me because for the past 60, 70 years, the whole Naga movement contention, my grandparents' generation, even for that matter, who are thinking that the whole Naga political movement should be outside the framework of the Indian constitution as such. But please bear this in mind that whether we like it or not, okay, Dr. Nixon talked about the whole, the interplay between ethnicity and constitution. I think these are things that can be much more explored, but I actually developed this idea of constitutional Indians because it was quite alarming for me, as a minority or someone from Northeast to see the way the political moment is happening in the country right now, where, I don't have to explain, but how things are moving out, how what I should call the right juggernaut seems to be just, just steamrolling everything that comes into it. So I feel like I just came up with this idea of constitutional Indians. Let me be very clear, not necessarily as a Naga. I definitely am a proud ethnic Naga, but I also thought like maybe this would be a very, very important model that can be adopted by the Dalits. This can be a very important model that can be adopted by the Lepchas and the Kutias and the Meiteis and, and the Kukis and everybody. I think that the large ethnic groups that Northeast is comprised of. So the whole idea of constitutional Indians, that I coined has actually, like I said, created a lot of furor, but I've coined this term not necessarily in terms of the whole Naga political movement, you know. Of course, it'll have a certain implication, because some of my friends, the comments that I'm getting from friends, they're saying is that for 70 years that Naga political movement has got stuck because there's a debate between whether the solution should be within the constitution or outside the constitution. So some Nagas are, of course, some Naga intellectuals are commenting that maybe this can be one way to actually articulate, you know, a new discourse on who Nagas are or where we stand with regards to the larger Indian mainstream and the larger world. Yeah, so these are things, but like I said, I think this whole constitutional Indians has to be understood, locating ourselves within the larger Indian political system. Yeah, so it cannot be, you know, understood in a very parochial Naga politics as such, but I think it will make much more sense when we locate this whole idea of constitutional Indians within the larger Indian political reality. Okay. Yeah. So I hope I've made something clear on that.
Thank you, Kanato.
Yeah. So, thank you, Dr. Nixon. Yeah.
John, are you there? Do you want to come in on this, or okay, we'll come back to John later. Okay, John. Yeah. Do you want to have a say on this?
No, I think from him. Yeah, I can come in a bit later because I'm more actually. I was thinking more about the question that Shimrayung asked.
Okay, so I'll come back to you. We'll come back to you before then. Okay. So we have a question from Karingpam. So this is addressed to, I think, Dr. Kanato. So during your, undertaking this research for this book, what is that, what is that quintessential Baptist character that is shared by the Baptist churches, irrespective of the geographical situation, since you have traversed across the different geographies within the Naga, locations. So did you come across any quintessential Baptist character that is common across?
Yeah, many things, but one thing that, if I may say, that is the trademark of all the Naga Baptists is that we are unapologetically evangelical, So much so that, we think that mission and evangelism is the heartbeat of the Naga Baptist denomination. So this our preoccupation with evangelism, our preoccupation with mission. I think this is something that I found so unique about the Naga Baptist, because other churches, when it comes to sending missionaries, when it comes to donating, giving to mission as such, we don't see much. To my little knowledge, I didn't see much among the other denominations. But when it comes to Naga Baptist, I think this heart for mission and evangelism seems to be quite fascinating and very unique to the Naga Baptist churches, irrespective of our state boundaries. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Nixon.
All right. So there's a question from Papino. So he's curious to know whether you have covered in your book, whether you have covered the important evangelist's visit to our land, like Billy Graham or send Mother Teresa to Tirab in Arunachal, whether you had covered those particular aspect. So that's
So thank you for that question. Yeah, in fact, like I said, there's a little bit section that I wrote on Billy Graham. In fact, in the original manuscript, I devoted about 2 pages to Billy Graham's visit. But I had to cut it short. Yeah. So there's about 2-3 lines that I've talked about the significance of Billy Graham's visit to Nagaland when the Naga political movement was going through a rather very violent phase. Yeah. So not necessarily. I haven't talked about the visit of other big evangelists or people renowned. Preachers and others from other parts of the world, but yeah, regarding Billy Graham, that is something that I mentioned a little bit because I found it quite interesting to the whole evangelical movement that Naga Baptists are undergoing. Yeah. Yes, back to you, Dr. Nixon. Yeah.
Okay. So there's this question by Shashila. Yeah. So there's this question by Shashila. I'm not sure because I think this has been address in the course of the conversation. So I think the question is, how do you define Baptist ideology?
Baptist ideology. I mean, like I can define.
Yeah. Sorry.
In terms. Yeah. Okay. I got you. I think I'll be able to define more in terms of what Baptists believe, and that is something I mentioned in the introduction. You know, who Baptists are, what distinguishes the Baptists. So this whole Baptist ideology, I'm very sorry. I think that is something that I have to do a little bit more reading and then a little bit more introspection. But yes, definitely, I have defined what makes Naga Baptist unique, or what defines us. So I think that is something that I've tried to attempt. Like I've talked about water immersion, you know, I've talked about evangelical faith. I've also talked about, you know, being born again. You know, these are things actually that defines the Naga Baptist faith. And I think ideology basically has to do with what we believe, you know. So in my book, I have talked about the Baptist belief, our doctrinal distinctiveness, if you may allow me to say that. But I actually haven't been able to really address this whole idea of Baptist ideology, maybe which I'll have to think more about that. Yeah. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
So before I hand over the time to the chair, I think I'll take this opportunity to place a particular question for both the author, Dr. Kanato, and the discussion of today's session, Dr. John, to maybe think about, you know. So I want to dwell on this that particular aspect which Kanato has actually mentioned in his course of in the course of his presentation, and which Dr. Vio has also asked. So there is, the general understanding is that there's an increasing disjuncture between what the church, the Baptist denomination or the church articulates in terms of the religious faith and the social reality. And that is also kind of interesting because if one looks at the initial part of the movement, I think Christianity or the church pervades Christianity as a kind of the marker or the anchor around which the Naga identity had to be formulated. Now, if there is now, we are witnessing this increasing disjuncture. So the markers of this disjuncture has to do with, of course, a certain kind of secularization that we are observing. And also the diffusion of various ideology which somehow diffuse that hegemonic whole of the church or the Christian ideology, whatever that is. So I'm just wondering if this is the kind of social reality that we are increasingly confronted with, which will also have an implication where the Christianity would no longer serve as that major anchor of that identity articulation, in a sense. So I was just wondering, so what would be the kind of situation, right? What would be the marker or the anchor which might probably come to replace, so to say, given the social reality, certain social reality that we're confronted with? Yeah, I leave that with that question. I hand over the time to Dr. Eyingbeni and both the speakers. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Moru, for filling in. I think there is one last question. Maybe Dr. Kanato as well as Dr. John may want to respond to this. By Ms. Avitori. I think she may have something at the back of her mind when she questions whether the British rule and Christianity has impacted adversely, in fact, human relationship with the environment, an ecological issue. I don't know, Dr. Kanato, if you have addressed that ecological impact.
Yeah. So just before I answer that question, I think that's a very interesting question. Dr. John has written a fantastic book on that whole around the issue which Dr. Nixon just asked. So I'll just leave him to that, and maybe I can comment. Yeah. So we'll leave Dr. Nixon's question just for a moment. But yeah, regarding this question, see, this book that I wrote, there's a small section I I quoted about G.K. Chesterton. You know, G.K. Chesterton said that just let me read it out for us. Yeah. So. Yeah, so Chesterton said, like, the main point of Christianity was this, that nature is not our mother, nature is our sister, you know. We can be proud of her beauty since we have the same father, but she has no authority over us. We have to admire but not imitate, you know. So I think this is a rather very interesting thing about nature, because one thing that we have observed is that, you know, especially scholars from the mainland or historians from the mainland think that, that a lot of environmental degradation or deforestation has to do with Christianity. But I think this is a very false equivalence. Dr. Eyingbeni would be the right person to tell this, but with my little understanding of the Bible, I think caring for nature, stewardship is very much part and parcel of the Christian faith. I think which Naga Baptists, you know, while so much engrossed with other things, we have forgotten that here. But that's very much part and parcel of our biblical belief as such here. So what I would say, yes, definitely there has been environmental degradation, there has been deforestation, there has been disregard for nature and as such, but I think this all has to do with modernity, you know, that very colossal, rather very sudden modernity that just one finding, you know, like dawn upon the Nagas. Yeah. So with regard to when we are talking about environment, destruction of the environment, or are, you know, like Nagas are becoming rather very rampantly consumeristic. I think this all has to do with our twist, I think our engagement with modernity. I don't think it was because of Christianity that, you know, there was harm that was done to the physical environment as such. So I think this has to be very much understood in a far more nuanced manner. So thank you for that. Yeah. Very interesting question. Yes, back to you, Dr. E. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. John, would you like to join in that conversation?
Yeah, I actually would. I just wanted to kind of respond to also several other kind of questions or, you know, comments that came. Just brief response. One was by Shimrayu when he talked about Baptist politics and Baptist ideology, and, you know, those. I was wondering if you ever look at American Baptist politics, you know, because the political interventions of the American Baptists, especially during the course of 20th century, you know, given the context of Cold War, you know, you have very important political postures being taken by Baptist denominations in the US. Now, given the kind of relationship that American Baptists have with Naga Baptists, you know, do you notice a certain disjuncture between the Naga political aspirations and what American Baptist politics stands for? So that's one kind of one set of question that came from what Shimrayu was asking. And secondly, you know, that whole discussion on whether, you know, you define also constitutional Indian as a, you know, that Nagas are just hanging on what is written in the constitution. That is the only promise with which one kind of becomes part of what India is. And you have also talked about various other communities within India who, you know, for whom the constitution is all that they have to kind of clutch on to. And I, you know, I sometimes wonder, because the question is also about the Naga context. I also wonder if there is a certain replication of this kind of thinking, even though, because where certain communities, certain groups among Nagas have to sometimes kind of clutch on to certain documents to kind of, you know, to always keep claiming that, you know, I am also part of the Naga family. You know? So, you know, homogenizing kind of impulses are always very much a strong part of nation formation, national formations. And whether Nagas are also, you know, not being receptive to and listening to the diverse voices and diversity within, whether they are able to accommodate that, beyond just documents, beyond just what is, trying to provide evidences, of, I am a Naga or not a Naga. Can Naga become a larger term which, it encompasses, this diversity. Second, the third point is, I think, this whole discussion that Nixon also talked about Christianity and its inability to sometimes, the discongruity between Christianity and social reality. And I think, there's also been comments on maybe, one goes into the congregations, you have to kind of play to the tune of the congregations. Somewhere I also feel that, we need to really have a theological reorientation. And I think some of the Naga theologians have been doing excellent work in that direction, but I think there needs to be because theology itself has to become disaggregated. It has to become meaningful within the social, cultural, local context. And it has to also become politically, socially, culturally meaningful. Sometimes, in the last chapter of my own book, I've talked that, maybe one of the limits of Naga theological contextualization of theology in the Naga context has been that there's been a great deal of cultural contextualization, but not so much of a political kind of contextualization or going into the social realities of Naga society. And that also leads me to the last question that was asked about whether Christianity and British rule has changed our perception. And I beg to disagree a bit with Kanato. I feel that, we have to look at Christianity also as culture. Christianity is not just a belief or a faith alone. It also has certain cultural implications. So in a recent article that I had written in the seminar, if any of you are interested, you can read it, called The Boulder Speaks No More. I start off that paper by talking about an incident that is narrated by Clark himself, by I think Mary Mead Clark in her book, The Corner in India, where she narrates this incident where a boulder which is held sacred by the villagers are desecrated by the new converts. And that boulder has certain significance, and that is the whole ecological question that comes to, that the natural world, the physical world, the space means something for the existing population. And when that, there's a new kind of thinking that is coming, which is seeing boulders, mountains, stones, rocks, plants, trees, everything as inanimate. There's an anthropocentric kind of focus that is growing with the missionary understanding. And that is, of course, having a certain impact on the way people are also thinking and as they take on to Christianity. Because these are converts themselves kind of desecrating the boulder. That, and so there is I feel that has contributed, religion also as culture. I'm not talking about religion as belief, but more as religion as culture has contributed towards a certain kind of anthropocentric thinking, which in turn has also led to the new kind of development, how we envision the term development. Is it big highways and is it big shopping malls, or is it development that takes into consideration the particular ecological, physical landscape that you inhabit? So I just wanted to kind of end with that, in the sense that, it has altered the perception of the way people think about their ecology.
Yeah, thank you to both of you for answering that question. I think both of you are so correct in mentioning, the capitalism in the guise of modernity, the impact on ecology has been immense, I think. And also, as Dr. Thomas has pointed out, I think the theological construction that has happened with the American missionaries, I believe in what one of the Northeast Christianity writer and perhaps an authority, F.S. Downs, have to say. He clearly mentioned that the American missionaries were preaching a gospel in which the people were just prepared for heaven. It was a very soul-centered preaching. And so they thought all else are dispensable to life, you know? And so I think the reaction of the early converts to all those related to our past, I think that tells us so much about the ecological repercussion of our theology. I think that's something that we can all keep on thinking about. And many of you here are scholars and researchers. You can also delve deeper into that question. I think that's all for the questions from the participants. I think we were about 90. We have come down to about 59 of us. And I think they have all benefited so much from the participation of Dr. John and also, of course, Dr. Kanato. Your inputs have been so insightful. And Dr. Kanato, on behalf of all the participants and on behalf of NSA, we really want to congratulate you for the publication of that remarkable book. And we wish you God's blessings. You have mentioned that you're going to work on the next one, right? A new book is in the offing. So we hope that that will be also inspiring and engaging. And we also hope that the book does well and enrich the body of knowledge involving the Nagas present and past. As for all the other participants and all those who have signed in from different parts of the world, maybe we can keep on thinking about our identity, present identity as constitutional Indians, to go by Kanato's phrasing. So in the light of what A.Z. Pizzo has said, I am a Naga first, a Naga second, and a Naga last. You know, vis-a-vis that quotation of or affirmation of A.Z. Pizzo to again talk about constitutional Indians, I think that's something that all of us can collectively think about. Are we first a Christian, you know, or are we first a Naga, or are we both at the same time? Or is there a priority to our identity? And these are questions that we will keep on asking. And I think Dr. Kanato's book has, you know, enabled us to ask that question. And one of the, I think, one of the finest outcomes of your book, I believe, is that you have enabled us to have a critical appreciation of our faith, whether we are Baptist or revivalist. I see that there are some revivalists, as I know them. And revivalists, they're an offshoot of Baptist. And so whether we are either of them or whatever our denominational identity may be, but I think you have instilled in us that critical appreciation of our faith. And I think that's something we can all be proud of. I think we're all very faithful to our denominations. That is unarguable. And we will continue, I think, to be critical of the faith that we have received from the Christian missionaries, as well as the influence that is continuing to come from the West. And you have talked so much about the evangelical Christianity of today, from America right into Nagaland. The influence is still on. And so I think you have taught us also to be critical of that. So thank you so much, Dr. Kanato, for gifting the Naga community, as well as the Indian community and the global community, with that piece of excellent work. So with that, I want to wish you well. I pray that it'll translate into sales. And then we will also continue to look forward to your next book as well. And so back to NSA, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Eying. I take this privilege to give a vote of thanks on behalf of Naga Scholars Association. First to the man of the hour, Dr. G. Kanato Chophy, the author himself, once again, our heartiest congratulations. And thank you for gifting us this wonderful and exceptional book. This book is here to stay, to draw more perspectives, insights, and conversations. And really salute to your dedication and for the major contribution to our people. I especially thank you for graciously accepting our invitation for the September talk, and NSA wishes you the best of luck as you venture into new writing project. Dr. John Thomas, the NSA community is humbled and extremely grateful for your positive response and your willingness to be the discussant on Dr. Kanato's book. NSA also takes cognizance of your seminal book, Evangelizing the Nation, Religion and the Formation of Naga Political Naga political identity as a commendable work, not only from the historical perspective per se, but as a significant research that has clarity, depth, and genuine intellectual perspective. And in that order, your book is very important and invaluable to the Nagas. As such, the insider and the outsider research works on almost the same topic between yours and Dr. Kanato's, in fact, present an interesting conversation. I just read the introduction of both, and I was like, oh goodness, this is like such interesting conversation taking place, and also reiteration of certain perspectives. Thank you to both of you for that. And so this is just a beginning of fomenting a strong and enriching association with you, Dr. Jones, for days to come. Once again, thank you so much. I also would like to thank Dr. Eyingbeni. NSA truly continues to remain very grateful to your concern, support, collaborations, valuable wisdom and insights, and also being a great cheerleader in our endeavor. You know, when I first contacted her, she was forthcoming, and she said yes, without any hesitation, to be the chairperson for the book discussion. I also noticed that she's a very pleasant person. This is the first time I actually had a talk with her over the phone, and very prompt and precise, which made it very easier for me to approach her anytime. So thank you so much, Dr. Eyingbeni, for this large heart of yours. Extremely grateful and pleased indeed for chairing the session so incredibly well. Last but not the least, I thank each individual who could attend this session and also support NSA's events and projects. Much appreciated. So have a wonderful evening and stay blessed.